questions during the feel free to just type it into the chat. We'll take a note of your questions. We will also have about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the presentation for you to ask your questions live. So with that, I'll hand it over to Michiko.
I think Michiko, you
need to unmute yourself, Michiko.
Yeah. We cannot hear you still.
There we, okay. Can you hear me now? Thank you.
Good. All right.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm really excited about this this opportunity given by Shini and all of you joining us today. I'm Michiko Katagami from, right now, I've been working for the Asian Development Bank for 20 years plus. I'm not going to tell you exact numbers, but I'm being really fortunate to have been working in the area where I really feel passionate about. And right now I'll do a lot of works on the rural development, food security, agribusiness value chain investments. We do formulation investments, implementation, negotiation with the governments and all the private sector companies, and also local community consultation, all sorts of things like the policy dialogue, the investment specific discussion, whatnot. And then we collaborate with the larger number of the, not just for the public sector people, but also the private, increasing number of private sector institutions. And so it's I'm really excited to work on this one, because this is one of the area where I always have sort of passionate about and learning about what is happening. I come from the corporate world and finance originally, from working experience-wise, and also trained as an economist. I studied the development economics, and then ended up in just doing all this first several years of the working in the corporate world, and decided to go back to the graduate schools and relearn about development issues. And then by chance, I joined ADB as a young professional. And what was really fascinating is that the ADB is really understaffed. So from day one, we were given an opportunity, okay, you manage this project with us, and then you deal with the central bank, and then you deal with finance minister, convince them, and then do this project. That kind of like degree free 360 sort of the degree freedom was working on the development issue from day one. And I was really fascinated by the diversity of the values and lifestyles in the rural areas in Southeast Asia in particularly. And I was stuck with this, struck by all this, the charm of it, but also at the same time, I was exposed to some of this different forms of these discriminations, disparity, gender disparity, and it comes in a very different forms. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's in a subtle way. So I just thought that I just wanted to do something about this. And then ever since I've been stuck with this that subject for the past 20 years. And then right now, particularly in the area of the food security world, the crop yield gap, closing the crop yield gap is one of the major agenda. Why is that? Because it's directly impact on this number of the smallholder farmers in Asia. Asia has got close to 400 million smallholder farmers. But also, when you look at the country level, regional level, the productivity enhancement of each one of the smallholder farmers is a big supply sort of driving forces to increase the food supply for the come 2050 or there's years, centuries to come. They would have to have a higher productivity to feed the future population. And then when it comes to when you look at the nitty-gritties of this, where all this crop yield gaps is observed, one major thing comes out. You observe this gender yield gap. What it is the difference between in the same plot of the parcel of land, same crop that planted and harvested, and you see the substantial gap between the women-headed household and men-headed household. And those are the things that we started measuring. It's closing this gender yield gap. That itself the gender disparities and women empowerment agenda, but it's also feeding to the food security agenda as a whole. And then this if you do that in over a period of time, food security is that the agenda will lead to that, the sort of making a sort of enable condition for the emerging economies to move on to the transformational structural transformation. That's sort of like an economic theory of that, and it's just a textbook cases of things. I'm not sure whether many of you are familiar with this, but this gender yield gap being not just for the gender issue, but also the food security agenda, particularly in Asia. So that's something that one of the many things that we're really trying to work on. And then when we look at this issue, just to go over to this, what are the key gender issues that we see in the agriculture? By the way, I'm practicing without any license. I never studied agriculture per se in the sort of academic institution. I just learned that by doing a lot of investment, a lot of studies together with all this academics, people, scientists and investors. And then one of the major thing is that the gender crop yield gaps that we observe in many parts of the lands in Asia. Another thing is about this persistently high malnutrition prevalence, particularly when you pay attention to the women population in Asia and the productive age. More than half of them are suffering from anemia. And that goes to show the malnutrition issues persist despite all this economic growth, despite all this great changes that we have observed for the economic growth that we have observed for the past few decades. So it starts with this. When it comes to gender disparity in the form of the gender crop yield gap, there was a big publication made in FAO. I think it was the theme chapter of the state of the insecurity in the world. I think back in 2010, there's special chapters looking at what are the gender crop yield gap. And then they estimated that if you close this gender gap that we observe in the field, and then that's going to solve maybe the reduce the number of the hunger population by 100 million. So that's really quite substantial. And then it's not about the women's not being able to produce as much as men. It's about the access to resources, access to water, access to land, access to the good inputs and seeds and variety, and information about how to cultivate, the best practices of the cultivation. So it's about the access to the inputs, resources. It's not about the ability of the women itself. And then that's clear in the literature, and we see that it's in the field level in the Asian project, our project level as well. And then, but when it comes to, so it's important to observe this from the point of view of this investment in an agriculture investment for the productivity enhancement. But it's not really that clearly easy to see. It's not really that easy observable agenda from particularly in Asia, because there is a sort of a allocation of land, all this for the regional differences in allocation of land. For example, in Africa, there's a lot of the studies has been done for this Kenya and as other countries about the gender yield gap, and then the way they measure all this yield gap across the women and men is that the way they allocate that, like for example, when they marry into women marry into a family, she is allocated a parcel one to cultivate. So in a sense, it's sort of like a labor distribution within the household is really clear. These are your women's plot of land, these are the men plot of land. So this from afar, it's very easy to just do, okay, so this is the women land, this is the man land. So it's easy to observe. But when it comes to Asia, usually what happens is it's an inter-household relocation of the labor for the agricultural works. So it's not really that easy to observe. But in the case of Cambodia, we see that clearly women-headed household, we still see that on average 20-something% of the project beneficiaries usually is the women-headed household. So we started observing that the gender issue between the women-headed household and also men-headed household. I'll skip this one because maybe this is very important agenda, but maybe it's not really in line with what I'm talking about. So, okay, so how do we measure this crop yield gap? And then how do we find that whether or not the gender yield gap is there? We resort to these technologies not just in a traditional way, you just do the crop survey, you do the sample frame, the select of the crop survey sample household, and then do the household interviews, and I get all this the data sets from the interviews. But if we wanted to get this in totality of the where all these gaps are, because what happens is, for example, this the Cambodia particular project, the rice commercialization project that I'm presenting to you, has got 16,000 households. And but for the normal crop survey, the sample size is about the 400 households, and that doesn't really tell you whole story of this. And that's just the nature of the survey, because nobody surveyed all the households. But with the technology, with the eyes in the sky, we are able to capture each and one of the plots and what they're doing, and we can zoom into where all the crop yields gaps are. And this is sort of like a first sort of exposure within our team to understand in totality where the crop yield gaps are, and then discuss and identify why there's a yield gap that's there, whether or not it's got something to do with the gender issue. And by the way, we didn't really think in that was just for the gender angle. Because of the COVID lockdown, there are not much of this, the things that we can do from the project size, that they're under the lockdown movement of the people is restricted. You were not allowed to go see the survey the household. You're not allowed to go for the focus group discussion in the rural villages for some time. Even before the COVID, in this particular project area, there was a flooding. So the physically was not accessible to some parts of the world. So incentive was that, okay, so what can we do while we wait for this COVID to end? It's not ending, but it's we were expecting that we wanted to feel that the sort of a questionnaires of the trained the surveyors to ask all these questions to get the data sets. But while we wait, can we do something? And so we resorted to this like NASA scientists or a group of people who does this kind of works. And also there is also the machine learning group of people who detect the crop yield for each of the plot in specific area based on the observation of Earth. So I'll tell you what we have done. First of all, this is the project area. We have this the canal in the middle is that what we finance is the main canal, and around that is the plain fields around. It's a beautiful area. It's the commercial rice cultivation belt in Cambodia. Specifically, it's the provinces Battambon and Kampong Thom, and also Preven. And then first, when we want to observe the crop yield, what we have to do is just to get the machine understand how to recognize the plotting of this rice field. So GeoSurvey team has looked at this training of this data set that they can observe. Then from the ground level, the previous survey, we know where the crop areas are. So train the machine on the eye to just to familiarize with this, what is recognized as the rice paddy field. And then we plotted the individual rice, sort of the individual household rice plots. What we have found is, remember I said 16,000 of households as a beneficiaries, and more or less on average 1 hectare per household. Turns out what we found is that the surveyor came back and say, look, Michiko, it's not just 16,000, there's a double size of this plot numbers. What's happening here? What happens is we didn't realize when we survey for each of the household, they say, we ask for how was the harvest this season, how much of the kilograms of the rice that have you cultivated from, and we calculate from based on the areas that they cultivate. What happens is it's not just a one parcel of land. Typically, they have 2 or 3 parcels of land to cultivate, not in a one lot. So in a sense, it's very, very small stretch of the world that the piece of land that they cultivate. And some of them have like 4. So 0.25 each on average of the small pieces of land. That's something we never knew. Of course, you won't be able to just apply the best technology there is for the small parcels of land, and also the access to each one of them will be at the sort of the add more cost of the cultivation for each household. And then this is what it looks like when the machine looked at data from the Earth, so the plot, individual rice plots boundaries. And after the learning of the patterns, and they just that the machine did that the plotting of this each rice plots from the sky. And then we layer the map on top of the crop survey about who, and we just geotag this areas of the parcels of land, and then they put the layer of the crop survey results. Now the crop survey results, based on that, that's going to be combined together with the machine learning, the skill sets, and also the satellite imageries and the drone imageries of these colorings. And then there's a way to translate the color of these pixels into the estimated crop yields. And then with the machine learning technique, we estimated the whole area of the crop yield results. So what it is the 400 household has got the actual data set from the ground, and also plus the rest of the crop areas, we had the estimated crop yield. And what we did was brought that to community for the verification and understand, let them locate their plots in the map, and then also compare and then let them notice the difference of the yields with their neighbors or in the community or semi irrigation schemes. By the way, this was the 16,000 household was the housed in the 9 irrigation schemes that we financed. I'll show you what it looks like. Oops. Maybe I'll just show you what it looks like is that there's an interactive map in the web. I can't really switch well, and I don't want to go I don't want to close this because it's working right now. So just let me go through the slides and I'll just show you at the end of how it actually looks on the interactive map that we show. This is a preliminary result. We haven't really cleaned the data sets of the some biases and all that. There is a clear gender crop yield difference in bottom bone and also compound tone, but not the Pravian. It's strange to see this. Some of the data sets shows the inner Pravian is the actual women-headed household yield the result in a higher yielding average. Remember, dry season is in this area, and it's the highest yield area the time of the season. Basically, the farmers do this cultivation dry season for the commercial purposes, and this is the rice export area. So this directly is like an income earning opportunity, not just for their own consumption. So we have, like I said, I haven't really verified this, I haven't even cleaned the data set. We came in a couple of weeks ago. So just to show you that there is gender differences in certain areas, but some areas it's opposite. And we talked about this with a focus discussion with the women, sample households, and why this could be the case, and what are the issues that you are experiencing for this, the 3-season cultivation. First of all, the use of the technology, we thought it was a very good idea, and it certainly was entertaining for the rural populations, but locating their plot they cultivate on the digital map was not really that straightforward exercise. There was a lot of complaints. Oh, why that the explanation is not in Khmer? Why this is just so cumbersome? I don't see that, the usual sort of rows that I see. Which one is that? Which is the canal? So they was translating all this digital map into their real life map. Was that sort of cumbersome? If you see this gentleman on the bottom, he's the pioneer is like, oh, this is my plot, and this is performing well than yours, and that was just like an entertainment purposes. But there are not many people who are able to stand up and say, this is my plot and it's doing well and stuff like that. But they're very curious about their result of their own plot, and also in comparisons to the other community. And then we had the special discussion with the women, and there was a lot of the feedback came out of this one. Number one thing is that access to inputs truly, just like the literature says, is really restricted, and that seems to be the cause of the gender gap in the 2 provinces. In this, the discussion that strongly came out is access to water during the dry season. It's not really that abundant, and particularly for the women groups, they're voicing that the access to the water. Another thing is access to labor. That's also predictive. During the dry season, is that the labor availability in the these areas and in any area, the rice cultivation areas is very scarce. So ability to employ the extra hands or the machinery, that kind of access to the services is limited compared to the man's headed household. And in the inputs, good quality seeds, that's also the limited. And also what we have also found is that areas that they cultivate during dry season, meaning commercialization rice, is less among the women-headed household. So what we have seen so far, we have to do a little bit more of the analysis part of it on the data sets, but it's the largely preliminary results is that yes, that the crop yields among the gender yield gap exists in certain areas, and then that's due to the caused by the access to water, inputs, and labor, and also there's a lot of things that people are voicing about time poverty. What it is the women, we did all this the typical day work around as what time you start waking up and what do you do, that sort of around the clock sort of a survey, how do they do that? And then there are clear differences that women on average work for about awake for 15 hours compared to the 10 hours or something in the men-headed household. So clearly there is because of the household chores, and they find it difficult to allocate more time for the agriculture, the field works. So what is important now for this, the gender crop yield gap, is definitely addresses the access issue for the women-headed household. That's very, very important. And then also, we want to do this in the totality, not just for the sample size of household, but it's when all women that can be involved in our project area. So we want to make use of this technology wisely to address the diversity of needs of the women-headed household. And that's the way to go to close the gender yield gap. So digital technologies and access issue is very important, and that our finding is consistent with literature. And what we're doing now in Nepal, this is about the access to the inputs, quality inputs, variety of the horticulture value chain project that we in the making. We are training the women to just first is to familiarize themselves about the e-wallet concept, and also what we want to do is the link that e-wallet and distribution of subsidized quality seedlings, link that the sort of subsidization targeting, and also that the distribution logistics into the digital manner, so that efficiently we can target all the women in the project area can access to this with the subsidized sort of the cost of this, that to ensure the cost of the inputs. And that we have studied the training of this digitization things, and we were excited about that going to the next stage. And Nepal is a really weird country where they really pioneers of this digitization of agriculture, and it's ongoing with that, not just for our project, but also USA and so many other projects. Philippines, we're doing the similar kind of thing, targeting the women malnourished mothers, and the Philippines has got the full sets of the data sets of the where those malnourished mothers are there, and we're trying to make an special access for the good land to cultivate, and water and inputs and information in a digitized manner. So I'm not sure whether you're getting what I'm saying, but let me just stop here because I'm spending too much time just talking about it, and maybe I'm willing to take questions. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Michiko, for that presentation. I think we've got questions that have come into the chat, and I'll just get the ball rolling first. I think it's been very interesting to see how you've sort of outlined, this idea of a gender crop yield, and then how you try to visualize it for the villagers in Cambodia. But then sometimes even at the first step of just trying to identify which plot of land is theirs, there's sometimes a little bit of tension, right? Like, the way that sort of, we view things from top-down satellite image data versus how, people think about their surroundings on a daily basis. I'm just curious, in terms of this crop yield project, do you have any plans to bring it into other countries, and kind of what are the immediate follow-up actions, after sort of this first round of communications with the stakeholders?
Right. For this from the satellite images and make use of this the remote sensing exercises, and I think it's very well advanced for the grains. We have any of this member country, we go in for this the certain kind of the production with the smallholder agricultures. So when it comes to grains, we're looking at this, or the deployment of this digitization analytics bring into that together with the ground forces investment. So right now we have an opportunity in India. We have the northern part of the grain belt. Also, the Bangladesh. We're starting doing the second phase of crop diversification, dealing with the rice and diversified into a horticulture. And in many parcel lands of the small Southeast Asian countries, the rice-based system would have to be diversified into a little higher value crops for the purpose of the income generation, but also climate resilience. Many of the paddy lands in the rice fields is due to this saltwater inundation, or the temperature changes, and also the degradation of land. It makes much more sense to diversify this different variety and less rice, and then towards the a little bit more the higher value system. So so like I said, if there's a grain, it's going to be easy entry for us in terms of the applicability of this digital technology. So we're thinking Cambodia is one, Vietnam is another. Southeast Asia, Myanmar, we were in a big way, but it was closed right now because of this current situation. We're observing what is happening, and there's a lot of opportunity in Southeast Asia as well. So it's an open invitation for anybody who's interested in pursuing this gender crop yield gap analysis. There are many researchers doing the works in the Africa continent, I think for the obvious reason, but there's a very limited number of the observations, the literatures on this from Asia, and also the actual investment to address this one. So this is relatively innovative area, and we're willing to collaborate with anybody who is interested in the joint forces to do, push this agenda forward.
Great. And I think that also touches upon another thing that I wanted to ask, but perhaps I'll come back to that later in terms of collaboration opportunities more broadly with the ADB. I see in the chat that we have a few questions. I think Nisha was asking about the issue of land ownership for women. So are there any specific sort of challenges that you've encountered in the various countries with regards to that?
Well, this is something that we have to touch upon, and but it's obviously a politically sensitive issue. So what we're doing is like this. For example, there's a history of this, particularly in the Southeast Asia. We are joining forces with the World Bank a long time ago, and actually go directly right into the ownership distribution, try to redistribute for the equal access to land for the women, particularly when women head a household. But that just goes straight into the political turmoil of this, like, why on earth are you doing this? Like, you're just a development bank and just coming into the sensitive political issues. So in essence, it was shut down. And then, another way of going around this is like land use rights allocation. It's not an ownership, land use rights, and for the purpose of the best efficient use of land for this, this value for money kind of a discussion. And then we bring in the land title, not the land use title, put a woman's name, for example, in the Philippines. That made a huge impact. Why? Because of this ownership, or some kind of a securing the access to the land for women, and then people tend to invest a lot more. If you have a parcel of land to cultivate for this season, but you don't know about the future of the land access for the next season, you might not do a lot of investment into the land. But when it comes to this formal title, you see your name on it. And then that will give you a little bit of a secure sort of the space where, okay, so I'm going to plant this crop for this season, and I'm going to put that make sure that the soil fertility is going to be the max level, and so that we can plant for the other crop for the following season. You can do that kind of a long-term view of that taking care of, do a lot more investment So we have seen that kind of result of coming out of the adding just a name, the husband and wife name, into land use access in the Philippines. So that's a little subtle way of dealing with the land issues, but it's coming up big way in many countries because of the smallholder issues. You have to aggregate somehow to the access in terms of the cultivation of land to the max out the productivity. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think you answered in a very comprehensive and nuanced way. And I think we've got a whole deluge of questions coming in fast and furious on the chat now. And I think actually, yeah, it'll be interesting. I'll maybe merge Priya's question a little bit with Susan's, right? So it's around sort of technology and labor saving, because the concept of time poverty is something that's a huge issue for women. So how is the ADB thinking about sort of technologies that can help women, whether it's mechanization or other things that you have at your disposal to save them time?
Mechanization is the easy one. There's a lot of service providers already. We don't have to, well, the decades ago, we used to purchase all these machines and for the rental and the name of the certain projects. But now there's a lot of the leasing, and we can back finance all these leasing services in certain areas and providing the essential, for example, harvesters and the storage and all this, and also the different kind of the precision agriculture advisory services. Those is really helpful, accessible anywhere you go. For example, the women in a typical life, they just have to go walk to some of the women that I met in the Laos. It takes about hours just get to their field and coming back also. And in that meantime, if you have access to all this information and services, you can just arrange better in terms of their time management in their life. And also sometimes we do this nursery services at the field level at the height of this harvesting under the project, so that the women can focus on the cultivation works. And then while the project has got the run the service on the side, or there's even some of the project has got their nursery services for the taking care of the children, and a lesson there, sort of like allocating, sparing some time for the production that the women farmers would have to hold. But the major thing is about the mechanization at the harvest time, because it's when the labor is really, really costly, and it's very difficult to hire human labor. That's go across any countries in Southeast Asia.
Sure, and I see you've got the crop yield web app open. So to Priya's question, are we able to sort of look at the yield gap across different crops, and is there something that accounts for the level of mechanization?
Okay. It's not moving so fast. Okay, so that's just the purple thing is that irrigation scheme. Let's go into this irrigation scheme here. I just hope that I will be able to show. Okay. Here, we just plotted, this is the rice plots, not all of them. That's the orange one is the women-headed household plot. This is a survey plot, right? And then this the survey result shows for that cross section. Also, this is the yield. It's very difficult to see. Some of the household has a lower yield compared to the main house, and the gray ones, by the way, is not cultivated. This is a dry season. Remember the dry season, the commercial time that they cultivate for money for the export rice. And some of the women-headed household will not even take this opportunity because of maybe of this labor issue, maybe because of this seed issue, but those things that would have to be clearly shown. So we plotted this in a sample size area. Oops. And there's an orange ones with a female headed household. Oops. So that surveyed area, we can show the gender yield gap. And then this is something that we were showing to the farmers and then discuss about, okay, what happened? Why did you not cultivate, and how was it? And there are a lot of people saying, like, because of dry season, there are not many of the access to water compared to the other men. We can show this in a wet season. That's a different result.
Are they all growing the same crops? So there's no like further
there's a
filter?
variety difference. There's a variety difference, and it's a dry season by default. They would choose to sow this at the commercial variety, but it's a that's a good point, Shani. Is the some plot, even just a tiny little bit, not entire plot is going to be usually for the use for the relatively new commercial variety, because of the fear of this trying something new. They would usually do just a tiny portion of their land is going to be allocated for the new variety, better variety, the commercial variety, and instead the rest is stick to the original variety. We often hear that because it's like, you want to try out, and what if it's not really going to work out? So risk averse sort of, even if there's a buyer at the front gate, you don't know the new variety whether or not that's going to yield as the result's going to be the promising as they say. So that portion has not been captured in this survey, but it's we have the different survey sets to address the understanding that sort of areas of this adaptation of variety. But that's a very major agenda when it comes to the crop yield gap, closing the crop yield gap.
Sure.
Secret is this, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to go to Anne's question. Do you think you need to conduct additional projects in different countries to assess what needs to be deployed? So I think you mentioned a little bit about some of the other countries like Vietnam that you're potentially interested in going into, and sort of for the solutions that have been identified, how able are they to be deployed in more areas and countries? So I guess the cross-country applicability of what you've developed.
What is very, very exciting to us, where is that survey plot? Sorry, Grand Truth, okay. What is really exciting to us, of the government and all the project people involved, is that we can see this, and is that we didn't spend too much money. It was just most of the things that's estimated. It's not precise estimation, but we see there's the whole area of 160,000 households. This is a crop yield. Where are the gap? We can guess. We never had this before. We had only survey a fraction of the household, and then that we understand the average among the surveyed household, right? But we see this in totality, and it's just the whole point of just doing this exercise to pinpoint where the gaps are and then why. That's very, very important, the starting point. And then government of Cambodia is just so excited about this. Oh, this is great. Can you make it a little bit more precise? So that was the agenda going on. So to answer your question, it's relatively easy to do this apply for this for any area we go in. So that's what we're willing to do. And not necessarily, well, for the academics purposes, to understand that measuring the yield gaps and so forth. Yes, it has to be, there's academic value doing the replicating the same kind of questions and doing the surveying and all this. But for the investment purposes, this is great. We are applying for this wherever possible. We don't need to, but it's for the project investment purposes. For us, it's just so exciting in totality. This is the crop yield. Wow, we didn't really see this in the individual plus. What we see is the whole areas on average yields like this. By the way, the yields for this, it's that the seasons go around 4 to 5 tons per hectare. That compares to that like China on average, so you reach about 6 to 7 tons per hectare. Of course, it's different variety and in different conditions, but there's a huge gap, and to close this gap, it's not, you don't need a new technology. You apply the best known technology, like in the forms of the cropping patterns, water, precise water supply, and also the good seeds. So with existing technology, apply that to the specific area where there's a gap, hoping that it's in the crop yields, jump up.
And staying on this theme of technologies, Sherry had a question about whether you see women in your projects being more open to embracing new technology and innovation. So in this project in Cambodia, for instance, have you considered rice carbon farming as a way to bring more income to the women?
If it's an income, of course, this drives the people's motivation. But when it comes to this technology deployment, we always see this technology plus is required. That's what we see in Nepal also. Because of the time poverty, convenience is very, very important. Once shot, this is what it is. Straightforward messages come out of this, whatever we're showing, it has to be take place. It's not like everybody has the mobile phones and really tech savvy and understand, this data sets translated into their action. It's not like that. So convenience and also the sort of a value for changing their behavior, that's the major things. And that usually come in the form of technology with that's a face-to-face interaction, advisory. That's how we just match that, introduce the technology in the rural areas in Asia.
Great, and we have a few more questions, so we'll try to get through them quickly. There's one on actually the funding of the project. So Jesse's curious, a number of companies probably have similar initiatives on farmer digitization. So how is this project being funded?
We have the loan project for this major infrastructure, but this kind of deployment of technology, we mobilize the grant funding just for testing out how it's going to work out. There are multiple small, but it's a multiple sort of like the grant funding. Grant funding is important, testing out the technology in the eye of the public sector, because they really want to see the efficacy of that before they just invest a lot of money. So we have a sort of introductory sort of a pilot testing fund that comes in the form of the grant for the government. And what we increasingly do in any of this project that we do in agriculture is that we want to invite many of this technology service providers come in and use this project as a sort of testing ground of this, and to stay with the appetite of these farmers to utilize the beneficial technologies so that they can, so sort of like a springboard for them to upscale the operation. Upscaling is what is needed for many of the tech companies in agriculture sphere. And we are doing that a lot major way in India and increasingly in Southeast Asia as well.
Great. And we have Susan and Anik, who are very curious about the mystery of Preveng. What is happening at Preveng province?
Yeah, well, I'm curious also. This is like, okay, this is relatively poor rural area, and we have to invest that. Number of the people that surveyed is very minimal, so there might be a strong bias, but we'll get back to you on this one. We're going to clean this data, proper analysis, write a paper, publish, so that maybe you're invited for this seminar before we publish the paper. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds great. I think it'd be interesting to see if there are some other factors that can actually outweigh or reverse the gender yield crop gap in some way or form. And I guess just to wrap up, and you kind of alluded to it earlier when talking about the funding. So more broadly, are there other projects or ways in which you're looking for collaboration, perhaps with other private sector companies, public-private partnerships, or other nonprofits in different regions or different countries?
We operate in any countries, in most of the countries. That right now we're closed, and we stopped the operations in Myanmar, but other than that, in Afghanistan we can't go in. But other than that, we Central Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, we're pleasant. We were one way or the other, we are engaged in agricultural food security investment, and we are really open for dialogue. And in fact, the way we see our future investment is not just for this lending to the public institution, for the public sector operations, and then just do the development works. We want to collaborate as much as possible to make our way of this at the long-term sort of a goal of this food security for each and every countries on a landscape. A lot of work goes into this, the environmental sustainability and GHG emission neutrality, but also this along the way we are we do care about the social impacts and as to how the livelihood and the rural community is going to come along. Anything, any service providers, any technology sort of holders, or also the value chain, the agribusiness services that comes along, right, that finds the connection to this particular institutions, landscape, we're willing to collaborate. I think it's that the what we're focusing on right now is that the new sort of business model building on the partnership. I think, and it's the exciting things happening. So we are more and more incredibly sort of fast in learning about how to collaborate with the private sector companies with the normal public investment with into the public sector. So we're open for discussion. And in fact, my major job right now is just to making a partnership that the business sense for everybody. And we're doing that like this week, I've been doing this for this dialogue in Mongolia. That seemed to be very impossible, but it's coming along. And now we are just shaping a business partnership with the multiple private sector and the herders and the government. So I think we're open for dialogue and discussion. If you have any interest, please just contact me and we can start discussion.
Great. And Michiko, actually, is it okay if we share your email address?
Sure. Please do.
Okay, that's great. And with that, big round of virtual applause for Michiko. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
And with that, we've come to the end of our first coffee chat for 2022. So if you'd like to find out more about the upcoming events that WOMAC has, please join us on LinkedIn, follow us, and we will be having an event coming up soon where you can also find out more about memberships if you need to if you are interested to join us. Yeah, and so I'm going to stop